Dr. Amara Wilson stared at the badge numbers through tear-blurred vision, memorizing each digit as cold metal bit into her wrists. "I'm calling my husband," she whispered to the sneering officer. Neither cop knew her husband commanded the largest military intelligence unit in Atlanta, or that this traffic stop was being recorded by technology even they couldn't detect. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. Now, let's rewind to see how Dr. Wilson's ordinary day turned into a nightmare that would ultimately bring down an entire system of corruption. The morning sun filtered through the plantation shutters, casting striped shadows across Dr. Amara Wilson's bedroom as her alarm chirped at precisely 5:30. She reached over to silence it before it could wake her husband, Colonel Elijah Wilson, who had returned late from a classified operation. At 34, Amara was already one of Atlanta Memorial Hospital's most respected neurosurgeons, having completed her residency in record time and pioneered a revolutionary approach to treating traumatic brain injuries. She slid out of bed and padded to the bathroom, catching her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes from the 16-hour surgery she'd performed yesterday, saving a 10-year-old boy whom other doctors had deemed untreatable. The child had been white, his parents visibly uncomfortable when they first met her, their hesitation dissolving only when the chief of surgery had personally vouched for her skills. She'd grown accustomed to that initial doubt, the subtle questioning of her capabilities that her white colleagues rarely experienced. Amara followed her morning routine with military precision, a habit she'd adopted from Elijah. 15 minutes for hygiene, 20 minutes for morning stretches and meditation, 25 minutes for breakfast preparation. As she chopped fresh fruit for her smoothie, Elijah appeared in the kitchen doorway, his 6'3" frame imposing even in sleep shorts and a faded army t-shirt. "You're up early for someone who got home at 2, she said, smiling as he kissed her temple. "Force of habit," he replied, pouring himself coffee from the pot she'd already brewed. At 38, Colonel Elijah Wilson commanded the most elite military intelligence unit in the Southeast, specializing in domestic threat assessment and counterterrorism. His team operated in the shadows, using cutting-edge technology that most civilians couldn't imagine existed. "Plans for your day off?" he asked, sipping the steaming liquid. Amara finished blending her smoothie before answering. "Mom's birthday is next week. I thought I'd head to Westfield Mall in Dunwoody to find her something special." Elijah's expression shifted subtly, concern flashing across his features. "Dunwoody? That place is full of wealthy white people who'll follow me around stores?" "I know." Amara poured her smoothie into a travel cup. "But they have that boutique Mom loves. Besides, I can't keep avoiding places just because I might face discrimination." The conversation was familiar territory for them. Elijah had grown up in a military family, experiencing racism in different forms as they moved from base to base. Amara's upper-middle-class upbringing in suburban Maryland had provided some insulation, but as one of only 3 black women in her medical school class, she'd faced plenty of prejudice. "Last time you went shopping in Buckhead, that security guard followed you through 3 stores, Elijah reminded her. Amara sighed, remembering the humiliation. "Maybe I should wear my doctor's coat and badge. Carry my diploma?" The bitter joke hung between them. "Just take precautions," Elijah said, his voice softening. He disappeared into his study, returning moments later with what looked like an elegant smartwatch. "New prototype from the Pentagon's tech division," he explained, fastening it around her wrist. "It records audio and video remotely, uploads to a secure server in real time. The battery lasts 72 hours. Amara examined the device, noting how it looked like an expensive fashion accessory rather than military hardware. "Is this even legal for civilian use?" Elijah's expression was unreadable. "Let's just say it's being field tested." He showed her how to activate the recording feature with a specific sequence of taps. "Just in case," he added. "Just in case," she echoed, knowing they were both thinking of the countless news stories about innocent black people whose encounters with authority figures turned deadly. They finished breakfast together, discussing her mother's birthday dinner and Elijah's upcoming training exercise. Neither mentioned the watch again, but Amara felt its weight on her wrist as she kissed her husband goodbye and headed to her Mercedes SUV. The drive to Westfield Mall took 40 minutes, during which Amara listened to a neurosurgery podcast, mentally preparing for a complex procedure scheduled for Monday. She parked near the mall's north entrance, choosing a spot close to security cameras out of habit. As she entered the gleaming shopping center, she immediately noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. Security guards making eye contact, shoppers clutching their purses closer, sales associates watching her with forced smiles. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her posture and headed toward Luminous, the high-end boutique that carried her mother's favorite designer. She could already feel the familiar tension building in her shoulders, the exhausting awareness that came with navigating spaces where her presence was viewed with suspicion rather than welcome. "It's just shopping," she murmured to herself, adjusting the elegant watch on her wrist. "What could possibly go wrong?" Luminous Boutique gleamed under artfully positioned spotlights, its minimalist design showcasing luxury items against stark white displays. Amara stepped inside, immediately noting how the two white sales associates exchanged glances. The younger, one whose name tag read Melissa, approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just browsing today?" she asked, the question carrying an undercurrent Amara recognized, the polite way of assessing whether a customer could afford the merchandise. "Actually, I'm looking for a silk scarf for my mother's birthday," Amara replied, keeping her voice warm and modulated, the same tone she used to reassure nervous patients before surgery. She particularly likes the Valeria Castellini collection. The reference to the exclusive Italian designer caused a flicker of surprise across Melissa's face, quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Of course, we have the new season's collection this way." Amara followed her to a display of intricately patterned scarves, aware of Melissa hovering unusually close as she examined the merchandise. Other customers, all white, browsed undisturbed by such attentiveness. A platinum blonde woman in her 50s, wearing designer clothing that screamed old money, watched Amara from across the store while pretending to examine a display of leather gloves. Amara recognized the behavior. She'd experienced it countless times since childhood, the suspicious scrutiny that followed black shoppers in upscale establishments. She focused on the scarves, finding a beautiful silk piece in shades of blue and gold that would complement her mother's complexion. The price tag read $450. Expensive, but within the budget she'd set for the gift. As she held it up to examine the detailed pattern, she noticed the blonde woman whispering to the store manager, a thin man with slicked back hair and a perpetual frown. His name tag identified him as Bradley Reynolds. The woman gestured in Amara's direction, her expression severe. Amara pretended not to notice, continuing to examine the scarf while acutely aware of the mounting tension. She decided to make her purchase quickly and leave. Approaching the register, she placed the scarf on the counter and reached for her wallet. "I'll take this one, please." Melissa had just begun processing the transaction when the blonde woman's voice rang out across the boutique. "Excuse me." She put another scarf in her purse. "I saw her." The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap. Other shoppers turned to stare, conversation halting mid-sentence. Amara stood frozen, the familiar sick feeling washing over her. The public accusation, the immediate assumption of guilt based solely on her skin color. "I did not," she stated firmly, maintaining her composure though her heart raced. "That's absolutely false." Bradley Reynolds was already moving toward her, his expression suggesting he'd already determined her guilt. "Ma'am, would you mind opening your purse?" he asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't a request. "This is ridiculous," Amara said, maintaining eye contact. "But if it will resolve this false accusation, I'm happy to show you my bag." She reached for her designer purse, a birthday gift from Elijah last year, only to have Bradley step forward with his hand raised. "Let's do this properly. I've already called security." The blonde woman, Amara now mentally nicknamed her Karen, stood with arms crossed, a satisfied expression on her face. "I know what I saw," she insisted, loud enough for everyone to hear. She slipped it right in when she thought no one was looking. Amara felt a surge of anger, but kept her voice level. That is categorically untrue. I am a neurosurgeon at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. I have no reason to steal anything. Her medical credentials, rather than inspiring respect, seemed to further inflame the situation. Sure you are, muttered Karen, rolling her eyes dramatically. And I'm the Queen of England. The security guard arrived, a muscular man named Trevor Phillips, according to his badge. He immediately positioned himself between Amara and the exit, hand resting near his taser. What seems to be the problem? He asked, addressing Bradley rather than Amara. This woman has been accused of shoplifting, Bradley explained, gesturing toward Amara's purse. We need to check her bag. Trevor turned to Amara, his stance confrontational. Ma'am, I need you to place your bag on the counter and step back. The request was reasonable, but the tone suggested she was already guilty. With deliberate calm, Amara placed her purse on the counter. I'd like to state for the record that I have stolen nothing. This is racial profiling, pure and simple. Trevor's expression hardened. Just cooperate, ma'am. No need to play the race card. The dismissive phrase sent a surge of anger through Amara, but she remained outwardly composed. I'm cooperating fully, but I will not allow my civil rights to be violated without acknowledging what's happening here. A small crowd had gathered, some filming with their phones. Amara noticed a few black shoppers among them, their expressions showing a mixture of sympathy and the resignation of shared experience. Bradley opened her purse, making a show of searching through it. Finding nothing, he began removing items one by one, placing them on the counter. Her wallet, hospital ID badge, prescription pad, car keys, cosmetics case, phone, and a small package of tissues. No stolen scarf. Check the cosmetics case, urged Karen, clearly unwilling to admit her mistake. Bradley unzipped the small case, finding only makeup items. His frown deepened. Maybe she hid it somewhere else, Karen suggested, unwilling to back down. I saw her do something suspicious. Trevor reached for his radio. I'm calling the police. They can sort this out. Amara felt a chill run down her spine. That's completely unnecessary. You've searched my bag and found nothing because I took nothing. This is harassment. She reached for her hospital ID. I'm Dr. Amara Wilson, Chief of Neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial. You can verify my identity easily. Trevor ignored her, speaking into his radio. We have a possible shoplifting situation at Luminous. Need officers for potential arrest and further investigation. Arrest. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Amara had heard too many stories of police encounters with black civilians that began with minor accusations and ended in tragedy. With subtle movements, she tapped the sequence Elijah had shown her on the smartwatch. A tiny light flashed once, confirming it was recording. She took a deep breath, centering herself. I'd like to gather my belongings now, as you've confirmed. I've stolen nothing, she said calmly. Bradley hesitated, looking to Trevor for guidance. The police are on their way, Trevor responded. Nothing leaves this counter until they arrive. Amara felt trapped, humiliation burning through her as other shoppers whispered and stared. Karen stood nearby, now looking slightly less certain, but unwilling to admit her error. I know what I saw, she repeated, though with less conviction. Amara addressed her directly. What exactly do you think you saw? Because I can assure you I did not take anything from this store. Karen's face flushed. You were acting suspiciously, moving things around, looking to see if anyone was watching. I was shopping, Amara replied evenly. Just like everyone else in this store. The difference is that only I was assumed to be a criminal. The minutes stretched painfully as they waited for police to arrive. Amara stood perfectly still, aware that any perception of agitation could be used against her. She focused on her breathing, on staying calm despite the injustice unfolding. She thought of Elijah, of what he might do in this situation, and drew strength from that. When the police officers finally entered the boutique, Amara knew immediately that the situation had just become significantly more dangerous. The two police officers who strode into Luminous moved with the confident swagger of men accustomed to immediate deference. Officer Michael Danvers, a stocky white man with a military-style crew cut, took the lead, while his partner, Officer Scott Reynolds, positioned himself strategically to block the exit. Both had their hands resting near their holstered weapons, a detail that sent Amara's pulse racing despite her outward calm. "What's the situation here?" Danvers asked, addressing Trevor while barely glancing at Amara. Trevor launched into an explanation, his version already skewed. Female suspect allegedly concealed merchandise. When confronted, she became argumentative and uncooperative. Amara opened her mouth to object to this blatant mischaracterization, but Officer Danvers held up his hand to silence her. "We'll get to you in a minute, ma'am." His dismissive tone made the honorific sound like an insult. The crowd of onlookers had grown, their smartphones capturing the unfolding drama. Amara could feel the weight of their stares, some curious, some pitying, some satisfied, as if her humiliation confirmed some deeply held belief about people who looked like her. "I am Dr. Amara Wilson, Chief of Neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial Hospital," she stated firmly, determined to establish her identity. "This is a case of racial profiling. I've been falsely accused, my bag has been searched, and nothing was found. Because I took nothing," Officer Reynolds smirked. "Chief of Neurosurgery? That's a good one, never heard that before." The casual dismissal of her professional credentials stung like a physical blow. "It's the truth. My ID is on the counter, where the manager placed it during his unwarranted search of my personal belongings." Danvers picked up her hospital ID, examining it with exaggerated skepticism. "Looks like it could be fake to me. Anyone can get these made." He turned to Bradley. "Do you have security footage of the alleged theft?" Bradley hesitated. "Not of the actual theft, but we have footage of her behaving suspiciously, moving between displays where our blind spots are." It was a deliberate misrepresentation. Amara had simply been shopping, unaware of camera positions. Karen stepped forward, her earlier uncertainty replaced by renewed conviction now that police were present. "I definitely saw her take a scarf. She was very sneaky about it, but I was watching her the whole time." Her voice carried to the gathered crowd. "She must have hidden it somewhere else or passed it to an accomplice. The absurd escalation of the accusation might have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous." Amara maintained her composure, though anger simmered beneath the surface. "Officer, I've cooperated fully. My bag has been searched, and nothing was found because nothing was taken. I'd like to collect my belongings and leave now." Danvers ignored her request. "We're going to need to conduct a more thorough investigation. There are many places someone could conceal stolen merchandise." His gaze traveled over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "What's in the pockets of your jacket?" Amara slowly reached toward her pocket. "Just my prescription glasses. Hands where I can see them," Danvers barked, his hand moving to his weapon. The sudden aggression shocked even the onlookers, a few gasps audible from the crowd. Amara froze, hands raised slightly. "Officer, I was simply answering your question." "Turn out your pockets slowly," Reynolds instructed, moving closer. Under the watchful eyes of the growing audience, Amara carefully emptied her jacket pockets, revealing only a pair of designer reading glasses and a pack of mint gum. "Now your pants pockets." The public search continued, yielding nothing incriminating, yet the officers showed no signs of ending their investigation. "We're going to need to check the footage and take statements," Danvers announced. "In the meantime, we'll need you to come with us for further questioning." "Am I under arrest?" Amara asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "If not, I'm free to leave, and I intend to do so after collecting my belongings." Danvers stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You're being detained pending investigation of a reported theft. If you resist, you will be arrested for obstruction." "I'd like to make a phone call," Amara stated, knowing her rights. "My husband should be informed of this situation." Something in her tone must have conveyed the seriousness of her request, because Reynolds exchanged a glance with Danvers. "You can call from the station," Danvers replied dismissively. "Right now, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The command sent a shockwave through Amara. "You're handcuffing me? Based on an accusation that has already been proven false? My bag was searched. Nothing was found." "Turn around now, or we'll add resisting arrest to the charges." Danvers' hand moved to his handcuffs. A memory flashed through Amara's mind. Her father, a respected attorney, being handcuffed by police during a traffic stop when she was 12, the helpless tears she'd shed from the back seat, the quiet dignity with which he'd endured the humiliation to ensure her safety. With that memory guiding her, Amara slowly turned around, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. As the cold metal closed around her wrists, cinched unnecessarily tight, she felt a burning mixture of rage, humiliation, and fear. The physical pain was secondary to the psychological blow, being publicly treated as a criminal despite her status, education, and complete innocence. "This is excessive and unnecessary," she stated, her voice controlled despite her emotions. "I want to register a formal complaint." "You can complain all you want at the station," Reynolds replied with a smirk. "Right now you're coming with us." As they led her through the boutique toward the mall concourse, Amara held her head high despite the stares and whispers. She caught fragmented conversations from the onlookers. Must have done something. Why else would they arrest her? Probably has a record. The assumption of guilt, based solely on her handcuffed state and black skin, was as predictable as it was painful. The walk through the mall was designed to maximize her humiliation. A deliberate perp walk that took them through the busiest section of the shopping center rather than the closer service exit. Amara focused on controlling her breathing, on maintaining her dignity in the face of this injustice. She noticed other black shoppers watching the scene with knowing expressions, the silent acknowledgement of a shared vulnerability regardless of education, wealth, or status. Outside in the parking lot, Officer Danvers roughly guided her toward the patrol car, his grip on her arm tighter than necessary. "Watch your head," he said perfunctorily, pushing her down into the back seat with little concern for her comfort or safety. As the door slammed shut, Amara found herself isolated in the cage-like rear compartment, the partition separating her from the officers providing them privacy as they entered the front seats. "Bet she's going to play the race card," Reynolds said to Danvers, unaware that the smartwatch on Amara's wrist was recording every word. "They always do. I'm a doctor. I'm innocent. This is racial profiling," he mimicked in a mocking tone. "Yeah, and I'm LeBron James," Danvers replied with a laugh, starting the engine. "Did you see her bag? $2,000 easy. These people come in flashing cash and designer stuff, thinking it puts them above the law." The casual racism sent a chill down Amara's spine. These people. The othering inherent in those two simple words. She leaned forward slightly. "Officers, I'd like to make my phone call now. It's my right." Danvers met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're heading to the station. You can call your lawyer or whoever when we get there." Amara maintained eye contact. "I'll be calling my husband, Colonel Elijah Wilson, commander of the 45th Military Intelligence Battalion at Fort McPherson." For the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty cross Danvers' face, quickly masked by renewed bravado. "Sure, lady, and I'm dating Beyoncé." But the invocation of military rank and a specific unit had created the first crack in their confidence. As they pulled away from the mall, Amara silently recited the badge numbers displayed on their uniforms, committing them to memory. Her wrists ached from the tight handcuffs, but her mind remained clear and focused. They had made a terrible mistake, not just in accusing her falsely, but in underestimating exactly who they were dealing with and the resources at her disposal. "I have to ask, have you ever been falsely accused or profiled based on your appearance?" Comment number 1 if you've experienced discrimination like Dr. Wilson, and let's talk about how these situations escalate so quickly. If you're still with me, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories that expose the reality many people face every day. The real question is, what happens when the officers realize who Dr. Wilson's husband actually is? And what power does a military intelligence colonel really have against local police? Keep watching to find out how this confrontation reaches a breaking point. The ride to Dunwoody Police Station took 17 minutes. 17 minutes of uncomfortable silence, punctuated only by the occasional radio chatter and the officers' muttered comments to each other. Amara sat perfectly still in the back seat, the military-grade watch on her wrist continuing its silent documentation of every word, every turn, every subtle abuse of power. Officer Danvers took a route that added unnecessary minutes to their journey, a small power play that Amara recognized immediately. As they pulled into the station parking lot, she noticed the building was relatively modern, with security cameras covering every entrance, a detail she filed away for later. "End of the line, Doctor," Reynolds said mockingly as he opened the rear door. "Welcome to your new office." Amara remained silent, conserving her energy and focus for the moments that mattered. They led her through a side entrance, bypassing the public lobby, another calculated move to minimize witnesses. Inside, the station buzzed with activity, officers and administrative staff moving purposefully through the space. Several heads turned as they escorted her past the front desk, curious eyes taking in the unusual sight of a well-dressed black woman in handcuffs. The processing area smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. A desk sergeant looked up. As they approached, his expression neutral but assessing. "What have we got here?" he asked, reaching for a booking form. "Shoplifting suspect from Westfield Mall," Danvers replied, his hand still gripping Amara's arm above the elbow. "Store." Security called it in, still investigating what all she took. The deliberate mischaracterization, implying multiple stolen items when not even one had been found, confirmed to Amara that these officers had no intention of handling this situation fairly. "Name?" the sergeant asked, looking at Amara, directly for the first time. Before she could answer, Reynolds jumped in. "Claims to be Dr. Amara Wilson, some big-shot brain surgeon. Says her husband's a military bigwig too." The sergeant's eyebrows rose slightly. "ID?" "In her purse," Danvers said, dropping the designer bag on the counter. "Along with this." He placed her hospital identification badge beside it. The sergeant examined the credentials with more care than the officers had shown, his expression shifting subtly. "Atlanta Memorial Hospital Chief of Neurosurgery," he read aloud, looking up at Amara with renewed interest. "That right?" "Yes," Amara replied, simply maintaining her composure. "And I've been falsely accused, publicly humiliated, and brought here despite no evidence of any crime." The sergeant's eyes narrowed slightly. "You searched her?" he asked Danvers. "The store did," Danvers replied with a shrug. "Nothing found. But the witness was adamant she saw something. Could have ditched it or had an accomplice." The sergeant tapped his fingers on the desk, his expression thoughtful. "Handcuffs necessary?" She was argumentative, refusing to comply, Reynolds asserted, the lie flowing easily. Potential flight risk given the situation. Amara met the sergeant's eyes steadily. "I requested to make a phone call at the scene. That request was denied. I'm making it again now. It's my right." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Process her first, then she gets her call." The next 30 minutes were a methodical degradation, fingerprinting, photographing, cataloguing her personal possessions. Throughout it all, Amara maintained her dignity, answering questions clearly and concisely, offering no resistance that could be misinterpreted. She noticed the shift in attitude among the station staff as her identity was verified. Subtle glances, whispered consultations. Her hospital credentials had created doubt, but not enough to halt the machinery of processing. Finally, Reynolds led her to a small room with a desk and phone. "You get one call," he said, uncuffing one of her wrists and securing the other to the chair. "Make it count." Amara rubbed her wrist, wincing at the raw skin where the metal had cut into her flesh during the unnecessarily rough transport. She picked up the phone and dialed Elijah's secure line from memory. He answered on the second ring. "Wilson." The sound of his voice centered her immediately. "Elijah, it's me," she said, keeping her tone even. "I've been detained at Dunwoody Police Station on a false accusation of shoplifting at Westfield Mall." There was a momentary silence. Then Elijah's voice returned, cool and controlled. "Are you injured?" The question carried layers of meaning between them. "Minor abrasions from unnecessarily tight handcuffs," she replied. "Currently, I'm restrained." "To a chair in their phone room. Officers Michael Danvers and Scott Reynolds are handling my case, if you can call it that." She emphasized the names clearly, knowing Elijah would catch her meaning. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably near the door, the mention of his name in this context clearly making him uneasy. Sierra Tango protocol activated, Elijah said, using their private code for serious situations requiring his team's intervention. Confirmation. Your watch is operational. Yes, Amara replied. It's been operating continuously since the initial accusation at 13:22 hours. She could almost feel Elijah's focused intensity through the phone. Understood. Location verified. ETA 19 minutes. Remain calm. Provide no statements. Sign nothing. Repeat. Sign nothing. Understood, Amara replied. Badge numbers are 4719 and 5203. Reynolds stepped forward. That's enough. Who are you talking to? Amara held his gaze. My husband, Colonel Elijah Wilson, commander of the 45th Military Intelligence Battalion at Fort McPherson. He'd like to speak with you. She held out the phone. Reynolds hesitated, uncertainty crossing his features for the first time. This is Officer Reynolds, he said, taking the phone cautiously. What followed was a one-sided conversation that Amara watched with grim satisfaction. Reynolds' face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization of serious trouble. Yes, sir. No, sir, I understand, but we were responding to... Yes, sir, I'll inform my superior immediately. When he hung up, his complexion had paled noticeably. What exactly does your husband do? He asked, the cockiness gone from his voice. Classified, Amara replied simply, but you'll find out soon enough. Reynolds left the room quickly, leaving the door ajar in his haste. Amara could hear urgent conversations in the hallway, Danvers' voice raised in disbelief. The sergeant's more measured tones asking pointed questions. The station's atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a routine processing of another black suspect was transforming into something altogether more concerning for the department. Through the partially open door, Amara caught fragments of conversation. Military intelligence. Pentagon connections. Governor's office calling. Reynolds returned minutes later, accompanied by a lieutenant whose nameplate identified him as Harrison. Dr. Wilson, the lieutenant began, his tone professionally courteous. There. Seems to be some confusion about this situation. There's no confusion, Lieutenant, Amara replied calmly. I was racially profiled while shopping, falsely accused of theft with no evidence, publicly handcuffed and paraded through a mall, and brought here despite no stolen merchandise being found in my possession. Officers Danvers and Reynolds have been unprofessional, discriminatory, and physically rough throughout this encounter, every minute of which, I should add, has been recorded. She held up her wrist, displaying the elegant watch. Military-grade surveillance technology, Lieutenant. Every word, every action, streamed directly to a secure Pentagon server. The color drained from Harrison's face. You're recording inside a police station? That's illegal. Federal override protocols are in place, Amara interrupted, repeating a phrase she'd heard Elijah use. Whether it was technically accurate hardly mattered. The effect was immediate. The lieutenant turned to Reynolds. Uncuff her immediately, then give us the room. Once alone with Harrison, Amara rubbed her wrists but remained seated. My husband will be arriving shortly with legal representation. I suggest you prepare your officers for some difficult questions. Harrison's professional demeanor was strained by growing anxiety. Dr. Wilson, perhaps we can resolve this situation without escalating matters further. Clearly there's been a misunderstanding. This wasn't a misunderstanding, Lieutenant, Amara cut in, her voice firm. This was textbook racial profiling, followed by police overreaction and physical mistreatment. I'm a neurosurgeon who saves lives daily, including the lives of police officers brought to my operating room. Today I was treated like a criminal based solely on the color of my skin and the false accusation of a prejudiced woman. Harrison struggled to maintain eye contact. We take allegations of discrimination very seriously, as does the governor's office, the mayor, and the federal authorities my husband has already contacted, Amara replied. The real question, Lieutenant, is whether your department will acknowledge the systemic issues at play here or attempt to cover them up. Outside the room, the station's activity had taken on a frantic quality. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, phones ringing constantly. Amara remained perfectly still, the eye of a growing storm, as the consequences of the officers' actions began to materialize around them. The cavalry was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would transform not just this police station, but an entire system that had enabled such injustice for far too long. The atmosphere in Dunwoody Police Station shifted dramatically as the minutes ticked by. What had begun as a routine afternoon was transforming into something unprecedented, a growing tension permeating every corner of the building. Dispatchers spoke in hushed tones. Administrative staff moved with heightened awareness, and officers gathered in small clusters, exchanging concerned glances as rumors spread. Amara had been moved to an interview room, a hasty upgrade from the holding cell initially intended for her. The room's attempts at comfort, a water bottle, cushioned chairs, ambient temperature, contrasted sharply with her earlier treatment. Lieutenant Harrison had stationed himself nearby, attempting casual conversation that thinly veiled his mounting anxiety. "Can I get you anything else, Dr. Wilson? Coffee, perhaps? A sandwich from the deli across the street?" His solicitousness would have been amusing if the circumstances weren't so serious. "I'm fine, thank you," Amara replied coolly, maintaining the professional distance that had served her well throughout this ordeal. "Though I would like my personal belongings returned." Harrison nodded too quickly. "Of course, they're being gathered now. Just a bit of paperwork and you'll be all set." His implication that she could simply walk away, that this situation could be resolved with an apologetic smile and the return of her purse, demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what was unfolding. "Lieutenant," Amara said, her voice level, "I think we both know this isn't going to be resolved with paperwork." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the station's lobby. Authoritative voices, demands for immediate attention, the unmistakable disruption of an established power structure being challenged. Harrison's radio crackled to life. "Lieutenant, you're needed at the front desk immediately. Code Silver." The coded urgency sent him hurrying from the room, leaving Amara momentarily alone. Through the window in the door, she watched the station transform into a hive of anxious activity. Officers who had barely glanced at her during processing now stole curious looks in her direction, their expressions ranging from confusion to growing alarm. 23 minutes had passed since her phone call to Elijah, 4 minutes longer than his estimated arrival time. The delay was strategic, she knew. Her husband never arrived unprepared. The interview room door opened, and the station commander entered, a silver-haired man with the weathered face of a career police officer. His nameplate identified him as Captain James Morrison. "Dr. Wilson," he began, his tone carefully calibrated. "Between authority and respect, I'm Captain Morrison. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding today." Amara met his gaze steadily. "Captain, what happened today wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a systemic failure, with specific individuals making conscious choices that violated my civil rights." The word misunderstanding minimizes what occurred. Morrison's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "We're investigating the incident thoroughly. In the meantime, you're free to go, of course. No charges are being filed." "I appreciate that," Amara replied, "but I'll be waiting for my husband and legal team, who should be arriving momentarily." As if summoned by her words, the interview room door opened again. Lieutenant Harrison stood there, his face ashen. "Captain, they're here." Morrison's expression revealed nothing, but the slight straightening of his posture spoke volumes. "How many?" "6, Harrison replied tensely. "Pentagon credentials, military police escorts, and 2 JAG officers. They've got paperwork from the governor's office and the Justice Department." Morrison nodded once, resignation flashing briefly across his features. "Show them in." The group that entered the Dunwoody Police Station's main conference room, minutes, later moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, because that's exactly what they were. At their center stood Colonel Elijah Wilson, his 6'3" frame imposing in full dress uniform, decorations catching the fluorescent light. His expression was professionally neutral, but Amara recognized the controlled fury in his eyes as his gaze swept the room before finding her. The relief that washed over his features was momentary, quickly replaced by focused determination as he assessed her condition. The team he'd brought represented a calculated show of force: 2 military lawyers in crisp uniforms, a senior Pentagon official whose presence implied high-level interest, and 2 military police officers whose alert postures suggested they were prepared for any eventuality. Completing the group was a civilian in an impeccably tailored suit, Martin Chen, one of Atlanta's most prominent civil rights attorneys. Elijah crossed the room to Amara's side, his movements precise and controlled. "Are you all right?" he asked, quietly, his eyes cataloguing the red marks on her wrists, the tension in her shoulders. "I'm fine," she assured him, the familiar exchange carrying deeper meaning between them. His subtle nod acknowledged both her words and what remained unspoken: the trauma beneath her composed exterior, the violation of dignity that no apology could fully address. Turning to face Captain Morrison, Elijah's demeanor shifted from concerned husband to commanding officer. "Captain, I'm Colonel Elijah Wilson, United States Army Intelligence and Security Command. I believe you have some explaining to do regarding the detention of my wife on fabricated charges." Morrison attempted to maintain his authority despite the unmistakable power imbalance that had entered his station. "Colonel, we're conducting an internal review of the incident. Initial reports suggest a Initial reports are incomplete and misleading," Elijah interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a precision instrument. "What occurred today wasn't a miscommunication or misunderstanding. It was a calculated series of civil rights violations perpetrated by officers under your command." He gestured to one of the military lawyers, who opened a leather portfolio and extracted a document. "This is a formal request for all body camera, footage, surveillance video, dispatch recordings and written reports related to today's incident. It's been authorized by the Governor's Office under state transparency laws and the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division." The calculated escalation, bringing not just legal representation, but high-level government authorization, sent a ripple of tension through the room. Morrison accepted the document, scanning it quickly. "This will take time to compile." "You have 30 minutes, the Pentagon official stated flatly, after which this becomes a federal matter with considerably less local control. The implied threat hung in the air, creating a moment of tense silence broken by Martin Chen stepping forward. "Additionally, Captain Morrison, I'll need private interviews with Officers Danvers and Reynolds immediately. Their actions today suggest potential violations of no fewer than 7 civil rights statutes." At the mention of their names, Amara noticed both officers shifting uncomfortably at the far end of the room. Their earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by the dawning realization that their careers hung in the balance. "They're entitled to union representation," Morrison countered. "Of course," Chen agreed smoothly. "Have their representatives meet us in your office in 10 minutes. The longer this takes, Captain, the more formal and public it becomes." The strategic pressure, time constraints combined with the threat of publicity, was having its intended effect. Morrison's professional facade was cracking, revealing the calculation beneath as he weighed his options: protect his officers at the potential cost of his department and career, or sacrifice them to contain the damage. Amara watched the internal struggle with clinical detachment, the same way she observed patients' families making difficult decisions in hospital consultation rooms. "Dr. Wilson," Morrison said finally, turning to her, "I want to extend the department's sincere apologies for today's incident. Clearly protocols weren't followed appropriately." "Protocols?" Elijah repeated, the single word laden with controlled anger. "Captain, let's be absolutely clear about what happened today. My wife, a chief neurosurgeon who saved one of your officers' lives last month, by the way, was racially profiled, falsely accused, publicly humiliated, physically restrained with excessive force, and detained without evidence. This isn't about protocols. It's about a culture of discrimination that your department has either encouraged or failed to address." The reference to Amara's recent surgery, saving a Dunwoody police officer who'd suffered a traumatic brain injury in the line of duty, landed like a precision strike. Several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances, the irony too stark to ignore. As the tension in the room reached its peak, Amara stood, smoothing her slacks with steady hands. "I'd like my personal belongings returned now, please," she said, her calm voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "And I'd like to speak with Officers Danvers and Reynolds directly before we proceed further." All eyes turned to her, the woman at the center of the storm maintaining her dignity and control despite everything she'd endured. Captain Morrison nodded to Harrison, who hurried to retrieve her possessions. Danvers and Reynolds remained, frozen at the edge of the room, their earlier confidence replaced by the unmistakable look of men watching their careers crumble before their eyes. What had begun as a routine harassment of a black shopper had transformed into a high-stakes confrontation with military intelligence, the Justice Department, the Governor's office, and one of the most respected surgeons in the Southeast. As Harrison returned with her belongings, Amara accepted them with a nod of thanks, then turned to face the officers who had handcuffed her hours earlier. The station fell silent, everyone present understanding they were witnessing a moment that would define careers, policies, and lives long after today's events had concluded. The conference room door closed with a definitive click, sealing 12 people inside a space designed for 10. The overcrowding created a physical pressure that mirrored the psychological tension hanging in the air. Captain Morrison sat at the head of the table, flanked by the department's legal counsel, hastily summoned from a family dinner, his napkin still tucked into his shirt pocket. Officers Danvers and Reynolds occupied chairs along one side, their union representative beside, them whispering urgent advice they barely seemed to hear. Opposite them sat Amara and Elijah, bordered by their formidable team of military and civil attorneys. At the center of the polished table lay Amara's elegant watch, looking deceptively ordinary under the fluorescent lights. "Before we begin," Elijah said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding elite units, "I want to clarify exactly what we're dealing with." He nodded to one of the military officials, who placed a sleek laptop on the table and connected it to the room's display screen. "This is a prototype developed by DARPA's surveillance division," Elijah continued, gesturing to the watch. "It captures audio and video with military-grade clarity, transmits via encrypted satellite uplink to secure Pentagon servers, and operates independently of cellular networks." The technical specifications were deliberately overwhelming, establishing technological superiority while implying access to resources beyond a local police department's reach. "In other words," Martin Chen added smoothly, "we have comprehensive documentation of today's events from Dr. Wilson's perspective, high-definition audio and video that no court in the country would exclude as evidence." Captain Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Colonel, with all due respect, unauthorized recording devices are not permitted in police facilities under Georgia state law. Federal security protocols override state restrictions when activated by authorized personnel," interrupted the Pentagon official, her tone suggesting this wasn't up for debate. "Colonel Wilson's security clearance grants him specific exemptions under National Security Directive 42. Whether this was strictly true was irrelevant. The invocation of federal authority and national security created an immediate power imbalance that Morrison couldn't challenge without specialized legal knowledge his department counsel clearly lacked. The military official tapped a few keys and the screen came to life, showing a split-screen display. Left side shows Dr. Wilson's footage. Right side shows synchronized security footage we've already obtained from Westfield Mall. The revelation that they'd already secured external evidence before this meeting had even begun sent a visible jolt through Morrison's posture. The timestamp showed 1:22 p.m., the moment Karen had made her accusation in the boutique. The dual perspective, footage played with crystal clarity. Amara examining the scarf, Karen whispering to Bradley, the public accusation, the escalating confrontation. The mall security footage clearly showed Amara's hands at all times. No scarf was taken, no suspicious movements occurred. Yet the audio captured Karen's increasingly embellished claims, Bradley's immediate presumption of guilt, and the security guard's aggressive approach. Morrison watched with growing discomfort as the evidence systematically dismantled any justification for what followed. The footage continued through the arrival of Officers Danvers and Reynolds, capturing their dismissive treatment of Amara's credentials and their escalation despite the lack of evidence. When the audio clearly recorded Reynolds muttering, "These," people always play the race card, an unmistakable racial microaggression, the union representative closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the indefensible nature of what they were witnessing. Most damning was the patrol car footage, Danvers and Reynolds openly mocking Amara, making explicitly racist comments they believed were private, and discussing how to make the charges stick despite knowing no theft had occurred. "Jesus Christ," Morrison muttered under his breath as the officer's unfiltered conversation played for everyone to hear. "Did you know you were being recorded in the patrol car?" Chen asked the officers directly. Reynolds stared at the table while Danvers glared defiantly. "Our body cameras were active," Danvers stated. "As was your patrol car's official recording system," Chen agreed smoothly, "which is why we've already submitted subpoenas for that footage as well. Interesting that both officers deactivated their body cameras simultaneously upon placing Dr. Wilson in the vehicle. A violation of department policy, I believe." He directed this question to Morrison, who nodded reluctantly. "It is." The military official advanced the footage to show Amara's processing at the station, the unnecessary continuation of handcuffs, the deliberate humiliation tactics. "I've seen enough," Morrison said, raising a hand to pause the playback. "Colonel Wilson, Dr. Wilson, on behalf of the Dunwoody Police Department, I want to extend our sincere—" "Captain," Elijah interrupted, "apologies are premature. We're not finished." He nodded to the Pentagon official, who pulled out a thick folder. "We've been monitoring this precinct for patterns of racial discrimination for the past 11 months as part of a broader Justice Department initiative. The revelation landed like a bomb in the room. This wasn't just about today's incident. Amara's experience had triggered the exposure of a long-term federal investigation. During that time," the official continued, "we've documented 73 incidents involving discriminatory treatment of black civilians. 48 involved officers Danvers or Reynolds. 17 involved both officers working as partners." She slid statistical breakdowns across the table: arrest rates by race, use of force incidents, complaint dismissals. The data painted a damning picture that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or misunderstanding. "Officer Danvers has had 11 excessive force complaints filed against him in the past 36 months, Chen added, consulting his own documentation. "All dismissed without formal investigation. Officer Reynolds has 9 similar complaints. Additionally, we've identified 26 incidents where body cameras were deactivated during black civilian encounters, a rate 5 times higher than during interactions with white civilians." Morrison's face had gone pale, the implications extending far beyond today's incident to suggest departmental complicity in systematic discrimination. "This goes beyond 2 officers," Elijah stated flatly. "This is about institutional failure, at multiple levels." The union representative, recognizing the hopelessness of his position, leaned over to whisper urgently to Danvers and Reynolds. Both officers now sat rigid with tension, their careers visibly disintegrating before their eyes. One of the military lawyers placed a medical report on the table. Dr. Wilson sustained soft tissue damage to both wrists from improperly applied restraints. The attending physician at Atlanta Memorial documented bruising consistent with deliberately over-tightened handcuffs, a known pain compliance technique that violates department regulations. The methodical presentation of evidence, medical, statistical, video, audio, created an overwhelming case that left no room for denial or minimization. The strategic pressure had its intended effect when Officer Reynolds suddenly spoke up. "I want to cooperate," he said, ignoring his union representative's attempt to silence him. "This isn't just about today. There's a pattern in this department. Certain officers target black people in upscale areas. It's unofficial but understood." "Officer," the union representative hissed, but Reynolds continued. "Danvers calls it maintaining neighborhood standards. We're encouraged to question black people in white neighborhoods, especially if they're driving nice cars or shopping in high-end stores." Danvers turned to his partner with naked fury. "Shut your mouth, Reynolds." "No," Reynolds replied, something breaking in his expression. "I've got kids. I've got 20 years until retirement. I'm not going down for a department culture I didn't create." The crack in the blue wall of silence created a pivotal moment, the beginning of a cascade that could expose far more than one incident of discrimination. "Get him out of here," Morrison ordered, gesturing to a uniformed officer by the door. "Take Officer Reynolds to interview room 3. Get his statement on record." As Reynolds was escorted out, Chen smiled thinly at Danvers. "Interesting development. First officer to cooperate typically receives consideration during sentencing." The implied criminal charges hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Danvers turned to Morrison, desperation in his eyes. "Captain, this is railroading. We were responding to a reported theft." "A reported theft that was disproven immediately. Upon searching Dr. Wilson's bag," Elijah cut in. "After which you escalated rather than de-escalated, made racist comments, falsified the basis for detention, and physically mistreated a prominent surgeon who saved Officer Michelson's life just last month." The mention of Amara's recent patient, a Dunwoody officer who'd suffered a traumatic brain injury, was another calculated pressure point. Throughout the evidence presentation, Amara had remained silent, observing the proceedings with the same focused attention she brought to complex surgeries. Now she spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "I didn't want this," she said, drawing everyone's attention. "I wanted to buy a scarf for my mother's birthday. Instead, I was humiliated, physically harmed, and treated as less than human because of assumptions based on my skin color." She looked directly at Danvers. "Every day I make life or death decisions in the operating room. I treat patients of all races with equal care and dignity. I've saved police officers, criminals, children, the elderly, without distinction. The oath I took as a doctor parallels the oath you took as an officer. We both promised to protect and serve. Only one of us honored that commitment today." The simple eloquence of her statement, delivered without anger but with unassailable moral clarity, created a moment of profound silence in the room. Even Danvers seemed momentarily shaken by the contrast between his actions and her principles. As if responding to an unspoken cue, everyone present understood that the evidence phase had concluded. What followed now would determine careers, reputations, and potentially the future of policing in Dunwoody. The question I have to ask is, have you ever witnessed a moment when undeniable evidence changed everything? Comment number 1, if. You believe body cameras and recording technology are essential for accountability. Or number 2, if you think there are better solutions. If you're finding this story revealing, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores these critical issues. The real question remains, with such overwhelming evidence against them, what consequences will these officers actually face? And how will Amara and Elijah use this incident to create lasting change? Stay with me as we continue this powerful story. Dawn broke over Atlanta with the calm before a storm. The peaceful hours before Amara and Elijah's private ordeal would transform into a public reckoning. By 6:30 a.m., the first news vans had already positioned themselves outside Dunwoody Police Station, satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Inside their elegant Brookhaven home, Amara sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone with a mixture of dread and resolution. "It's starting," she said quietly as Elijah placed a cup of coffee beside her. The first news reports had appeared online overnight, initially vague, mentioning only an incident of alleged racial profiling involving a prominent medical professional. By morning, her name had leaked: Atlanta neurosurgeon detained on false shoplifting accusation. Elijah's military connections remained unmentioned, a strategic omission they had requested to prevent the story from becoming about his influence rather than the systemic issues at play. "Martin says we should expect a formal statement from the department by noon," Elijah said, reviewing messages on his secure phone. "The mayor's office has already reached out. They want to coordinate messaging." The political machinery was spinning up, various entities positioning themselves as the story gained momentum. Amara set her phone down, rubbing her temples. "I just wanted to buy a scarf," she murmured, the simple truth of it striking her anew. "Now I'm about to become a hashtag." Elijah placed his hand over hers. "You have choices. We can issue a brief statement and decline further comment. Your privacy matters." Amara considered this, then shook her head. "If it were just about me, I'd stay silent. But it's not. It's about every black person who's been followed through a store, questioned for being in the wrong neighborhood, or worse." Her expression hardened with resolve. "If my position and credentials can help expose this reality, I have a responsibility to speak up." By mid-morning, their carefully prepared statement had been released through Martin Chen's office. It was factual, measured, and devastating in its simplicity. A distinguished neurosurgeon racially profiled while shopping, falsely accused without evidence, publicly handcuffed and detained. The statement included confirmation that the incident had been fully recorded and that evidence had been provided to Internal Affairs and the District Attorney's Office. It concluded with a single quote from Amara. "What happened to me happens to Black Americans every day, many without the resources or platform to seek justice. This must change." The strategic release, timed to coincide with morning news cycles, created an immediate media firestorm. By noon, carefully selected footage from the incident had been provided to 3 respected journalists, showing Karen's false accusation, the officer's dismissive treatment of Amara's credentials, and the unnecessarily aggressive handcuffing. The visual evidence transformed what might have been dismissible as conflicting accounts into undeniable reality. Carefully omitted were the most inflammatory racist comments captured in the patrol car, leverage reserved for potential legal proceedings. News of Amara's profession spread rapidly, adding a layer of outrage to the narrative. Social media erupted with variations of "they handcuffed a brain surgeon." Atlanta Memorial Hospital issued a statement of support, noting that Dr. Wilson has saved countless lives, including those of first responders injured in the line of duty. The hospital's chief administrator confirmed that just last month, Amara had performed emergency surgery on Officer James Michelson after a serious car accident, saving him from potentially fatal brain trauma. The revelation added bitter irony to her treatment by fellow officers from a neighboring precinct. By late afternoon, Westfield Mall had identified Karen Livingston and Bradley Reynolds through security footage. Their names hadn't been publicly released, but internal disciplinary measures were already underway. The mall issued a public apology to Amara, announcing Bradley's termination and the implementation of new anti-bias training for all security personnel. Karen's employer, a prominent real estate agency, was facing mounting pressure as social media users connected her to the incident. Captain Morrison's press conference at 2 p.m. was a study in damage control. "The Dunwoody Police Department is committed to fair and equal treatment of all citizens," he stated, reading from prepared remarks. "The incident involving Dr. Amara Wilson is under thorough investigation. The officers involved have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation." The carefully worded statement avoided admission of wrongdoing, while signaling that action was being taken. What Morrison hadn't anticipated was the next development. Officer Scott Reynolds had decided to break ranks completely. Through his newly retained attorney, Reynolds released a statement describing systematic patterns of racial profiling within the department, including unofficial directives to monitor black shoppers in upscale areas and apply different standards of suspicious behavior based on race. His cooperation with internal and federal investigators was confirmed, sending shockwaves through the department and transforming the narrative from an isolated incident to potential systemic corruption. By evening, the city was divided along predictable lines. Comment sections and social media platforms filled with contradictory responses. Support for Amara, alongside attempts to justify the officer's actions. Calls for police reform alongside defensive assertions about the difficulties of law enforcement. Death threats began appearing in Amara's professional email and social media accounts, necessitating increased security at their home and at the hospital. The Dunwoody Police Officers Association initially issued a statement urging Caution against rushing to judgment before all facts are known, standard language that rang hollow against the irrefutable video evidence. By nightfall, as Reynolds's allegations gained traction, the association amended their position, stating they condemn any discriminatory practices and support appropriate accountability measures for violations of public trust. The hasty revision revealed the crumbling support for Danvers and his defenders within the department. Meanwhile, Amara and Elijah's home phone rang constantly with media requests, political figures seeking association, and civil rights organizations offering support. They declined all interviews for the first 48 hours, a strategic decision to let the evidence speak for itself and allow public opinion to solidify around the facts rather than personalities. "The governor wants to meet," Martin Chen informed them during an evening conference call. "So does the mayor. They're positioning themselves as reformers now that the wind direction is clear." Elijah's expression remained neutral, but Amara could read the calculation in his eyes. "Tell them we'll meet next week," he replied, "after the district attorney announces whether charges will be filed. We're not interested in photo opportunities without substantive policy changes." Their united front, the decorated military intelligence officer and the brilliant neurosurgeon, presented a formidable challenge to the usual tactics used to discredit victims of police misconduct. Attempts to investigate Amara's background for potential scandals came up empty. Her professional record was impeccable, her personal life beyond reproach. Similarly, Elijah's military career was distinguished by commendations and rapid advancement, with connections extending to the highest levels of the Pentagon. The usual playbook for undermining black credibility in police encounters had failed entirely. As night fell over Atlanta, Amara stood at their bedroom window watching the security team Elijah had arranged patrolling the perimeter of their property. "I never wanted this spotlight," she said softly as he joined her. "I know," he replied, gently touching the fading marks on her wrists where the handcuffs had been, "but sometimes the role finds you, rather than you finding it." Amara leaned against his solid presence, drawing strength from his steadiness. "The hospital called. Some patients are requesting different surgeons." The reality cut deep, her life-saving skills suddenly secondary to her status as a symbol in a cultural battle. "Others are specifically requesting you," Elijah reminded her. "The waiting list for consultations has tripled." It was true. For every person who viewed her through a political lens, others saw her as a hero standing against injustice while maintaining her commitment to healing. "Tomorrow will be harder," he warned gently. "The initial shock is wearing off. Now comes the backlash, the attempts to reframe the narrative, the political maneuvering." Amara nodded, mentally preparing herself. "I keep thinking about the patient I need to see tomorrow. 10-year-old with an arteriovenous malformation. He doesn't care about any of this, he just needs his surgeon focused and at her best." Elijah smiled, recognizing the core of who his wife was. A healer first, reluctant symbol second. "One case at a time," he said, "one truth at a time." As they prepared for bed, news alerts continued to ping on their phones. The story was spreading nationally now, connecting to broader conversations about race, authority, and accountability. What had begun as a simple shopping trip had catalyzed into something neither of them could have anticipated, a potential inflection point in the ongoing struggle for equal justice. Throughout the night, media outlets continued piecing together the story, examining personnel records, interviewing former detainees with similar experiences, and investigating the broader culture of the Dunwoody Police Department. By morning, what had begun as an incident involving 2 officers had expanded to implicate an entire system, exactly as Elijah had strategically intended. The media storm was just beginning, its full impact yet to be realized as institutions scrambled to position themselves on the right side of a narrative that was quickly becoming undeniable. For Amara and Elijah, the private ordeal had transformed into a public mission, one they had never sought but would not shy away from, regardless of the personal cost. 3 weeks after the incident at Westfield Mall, Amara stood before the polished mahogany podium in the state capitol's press room, her posture perfect despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession. As she adjusted the microphone, the sound reminiscent of rainfall on a tin roof. The findings of the internal police investigation released today confirm what the evidence has shown from the beginning, she stated, her voice steady and measured. Officers Danvers and Reynolds engaged in racial profiling, excessive force, and the falsification of police reports. These weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. They were deliberate violations of both departmental policy and my civil rights. Behind her stood Elijah in full-dress uniform, Martin Chen in an impeccable suit, and representatives from 3 civil rights organizations. The united front they presented wasn't merely symbolic. It reflected the coalition they'd built over weeks of strategic meetings and careful coordination. The internal investigation's findings had been released that morning, a 47-page report documenting multiple policy violations and recommending the immediate termination of both officers. More significantly, the report acknowledged systemic failures in training, supervision, and accountability that had allowed discriminatory practices to continue despite multiple complaints. For Amara, the public vindication was secondary to the announcement that followed her statement. District Attorney Caroline Hernandez approached the podium, her expression solemn. After reviewing all available evidence, my office is filing criminal charges against Officers Michael Danvers and Scott Reynolds for official misconduct, filing false reports and civil rights violations. The declaration sent ripples through the assembled press corps. Criminal charges against police officers remained exceedingly rare, even with compelling evidence. Additionally, Hernandez continued, we've opened a broader investigation into patterns of discriminatory policing within the Dunwoody Police Department in coordination with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. The strategic escalation, from individual officers to departmental culture, represented exactly what Amara and Elijah had insisted upon during private negotiations with city officials. Symbolic actions and vague promises of review had been firmly rejected. Only substantive structural change would suffice. As the press conference concluded, reporters shouted questions about Karen Livingston, whose identity had become public knowledge the previous week. Ms. Livingston is facing charges of filing a false police report, Chen confirmed. She's also named in Dr. Wilson's civil lawsuit, along with Bradley Reynolds and Westfield Mall's management company. The consequences had extended far beyond the police department. Bradley remained unemployed, blacklisted from retail management positions throughout the metro area. Karen had been placed on indefinite leave by her real estate firm before resigning under pressure. Both had become reluctant symbols of how casual racism could escalate into life-threatening situations for Black Americans. Back at their home, that evening, Amara kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the sofa, the professional composure she'd maintained all day finally giving way to exhaustion. I never imagined I'd be testifying before the state legislature about racial profiling, she said, closing her eyes briefly. I thought my biggest challenge this month would be the Jensen twins' synchronized craniotomies. Elijah handed her a glass of wine before settling beside her. The governor's police reform task force appointment came through today, he said, showing her the official letter on his tablet. They want both of us, you for civilian perspective, me for oversight implementation. The invitation represented both an opportunity and a burden, more demands on their already stretched time, but also a chance to create lasting institutional change. We need to be strategic about our commitments, Amara cautioned, thinking of her patients. I've already reduced my surgery schedule by 30% to accommodate all these meetings and testimonies. The professional cost had been significant. Though the hospital administration publicly supported her, the reality of being a symbol in a polarizing debate had complicated her work life. Some colleagues walked on eggshells around her. Others sought her out as a confidant to share their own experiences of discrimination, and a small but vocal minority resented the attention her case had brought to the institution. The settlement offer came in, Elijah mentioned, changing the subject. The city had proposed $2 million to resolve potential civil claims, a substantial sum that reflected their desire to avoid protracted litigation and additional negative publicity. Martin thinks we could get more if we pushed, Amara nodded. But that's not the point, is it? Their decision had been made days earlier. Any settlement would be directed to the newly established Wilson Foundation, providing legal representation to victims of racial profiling who lacked the resources and connections that had proven so crucial in their case. The press conference for the foundation launch is scheduled for Monday, Elijah confirmed. Initial funding commitments have reached $4.6 million, including our settlement and matching donations from hospital board members. The foundation represented their vision for lasting impact, transforming their personal ordeal into structural support for others facing similar injustice. Though the week since the incident had brought public validation, they had also carried unexpected personal costs. Death threats continued to arrive regularly, necessitating ongoing security measures at their home and workplaces. Conservative media outlets had attempted to investigate Amara's background, searching for anything that might undermine her credibility. Finding nothing substantive, some had resorted to questioning whether the incident had been staged to advance a political agenda, a conspiracy theory that gained traction in certain online communities despite the overwhelming evidence. The EIDU strain had manifested physically for Amara. Tension, headaches, disrupted sleep, moments of anxiety when entering public spaces. Yet alongside these challenges had come unexpected opportunities for healing and connection. The morning after the press conference, Amara entered Atlanta Memorial Hospital through the physician's entrance, nodding to the security guards who had become notably more attentive since the incident. Her first appointment waited in consultation. Room 3, a follow-up with Jason Michelson, the officer whose life she'd saved a month before her own encounter with Dunwoody police. "Dr. Wilson," he greeted her, standing somewhat unsteadily. At 42, Michelson was rebuilding his strength after the car accident that had nearly claimed his life. "How are you feeling, Officer Michelson?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit as she reviewed his latest scans. "Better every day, thanks to you." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to say, what happened to you at the mall? That many of us don't work that way, don't think that way." Amara looked up from the scans, meeting his eyes. "I know that. I've never believed all officers are the same, just as I hope people don't assume all black citizens are the same." The moment of understanding between them, surgeon and patient, black woman and white police officer, represented the complex human reality beneath the polarizing headlines. As Michelson's appointment concluded, Amara's phone buzzed with a news alert. Officer Reynolds had agreed to testify against other officers in exchange for a reduced sentence, implicating 6 additional members of the department in systematic civil rights violations. The domino effect they had anticipated was accelerating, exposing patterns that extended beyond individual officers to supervisory personnel who had enabled or concealed discriminatory practices. Meanwhile, Officer Danvers had doubled down on his defense, hiring controversial attorney James Harrington, known for representing police officers accused of misconduct. Harrington had already begun the predictable strategy of attacking Amara's character, suggesting the prominent surgeon had an agenda and had escalated a routine investigation through non-compliance. The attempts to rewrite history faced an insurmountable obstacle: the comprehensive audio and video evidence that contradicted every alternative narrative. By mid-afternoon, Amara was in surgery, performing a delicate procedure to remove a tumor from a 16-year-old's brainstem. For 6 hours, she existed in the focused state that had defined her professional life: precise movements, clear decisions, complete presence. The operating room remained the space where her identity was reduced to its essence, not a symbol or hashtag, but simply a surgeon committed to preserving life and function. As she completed the final sutures, her surgical team erupted in applause. The tumor had been completely removed, with minimal impact to surrounding tissue. The moment of professional triumph provided a counterbalance to the ongoing stress of public scrutiny. Later that evening, as Amara and Elijah prepared for a rare, quiet dinner at home, his secure phone rang, the specialized tone indicating a call from his military superiors. The conversation was brief but consequential. He was being offered a promotion and reassignment to the Pentagon, heading a new initiative on integrity in domestic intelligence operations. The position would mean relocation to Washington, D.C., a significant disruption to their lives, but also an opportunity to influence policy at the national level. "They want an answer by Monday," he said after ending the call. "It's your career at stake, too." The decision before them embodied the central tension they'd navigated since the incident, balancing their private aspirations against their public responsibilities, weighing personal comfort against potential impact. As they discussed the possibilities, a notification appeared on Amara's tablet. Reynolds's expanded testimony had implicated Danvers in a previously unreported incident involving excessive force against a black teenager last year. The case had been covered up through falsified reports and intimidation of the victim's family. The revelation confirmed what they had suspected. Their incident had merely been the visible surface of a much deeper pattern. The consequences were still unfolding, ripples expanding outward from the moment Amara had been handcuffed in a boutique, simply for shopping while black. What had begun as personal humiliation was transforming into institutional reckoning, exactly as they had intended, when deciding to pursue justice rather than accepting quiet resolution. As the evening news began another cycle of reporting on the Wilson case, Amara muted the television, turning instead to the thank you card that had arrived that morning from her teenage patient's parents. Their gratitude for her surgical skill reminded her of her core identity beyond the headlines: healer, scientist, caregiver. Whatever came next, that essential truth would remain unchanged. 6 months after being handcuffed at Westfield Mall, Dr. Amara Wilson stood once again at the entrance to Luminous Boutique, her reflection shimmering in the polished glass doors. The familiar tightness in her chest returned, a physiological memory of humiliation and fear. But she breathed through it methodically, the way she centered herself before complex surgeries. This return wasn't impulsive, but deliberately chosen, a personal reclamation of space after half a year of public and private transformation. As she stepped through the doorway, the differences were immediately apparent. The security guard who greeted her, a young black woman with a professional demeanor, offered a respectful nod. "Dr. Wilson, welcome back to Luminous. Please, let me know if you need any assistance today." The recognition wasn't surprising. Amara's face had appeared in countless news reports, magazine features, and television interviews over the months. What had begun as an incident of discrimination had catalyzed into a movement for accountability that extended far beyond one boutique or police department. Inside the store, Amara noticed subtle but significant changes: a more diverse sales staff, a new manager who approached with genuine warmth rather than suspicion, and a discreet plaque near the register announcing the store's commitment to equitable treatment of all customers regardless of race, gender, or background. The carefully worded statement represented one small victory among many that had emerged from her ordeal. "Dr. Wilson," the manager said, extending her hand, "I'm Clarissa Johnson. We're honored to have you visit us today." The formality might have seemed excessive for a simple shopping trip, but both women understood the symbolic importance of this interaction. "Thank you," Amara replied simply. "I'm looking for a birthday gift for my mother." The normalcy of the exchange, being treated as a valued customer rather than a potential criminal, represented the most basic form of dignity that had been denied to her 6 months earlier. As Clarissa showed her the new collection of scarves, Amara's thoughts drifted to the cascading consequences that had unfolded since that day. Later that afternoon, Amara sat across from Scott Reynolds in a private room at Martin Chen's law office. The former police officer looked different out of uniform, smaller somehow, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting ongoing stress. His testimony against former colleagues had made him a pariah among many in law enforcement, while simultaneously elevating him as a whistleblower in reform circles. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said, hands fidgeting nervously with his water glass. "I wasn't sure you would." Amara studied him thoughtfully. "Your cooperation has been instrumental in exposing patterns that went far beyond one incident. That matters." Reynolds nodded, eyes downcast. "I should have spoken up sooner. There were so many times I saw things, heard things, and just went along. His cooperation had resulted in a plea deal, 18 months probation instead of the 5-year sentence Danvers now faced after being convicted on multiple counts of official misconduct, civil rights violations, and filing false reports. Reynolds would never work in law enforcement again, but he had avoided incarceration by providing crucial testimony that had led to charges against 6 additional officers and 2 supervisors. "What will you do now?" Amara asked. "I'm working with a police reform advocacy group," he replied, "using my experience to help identify problematic practices and cultural issues within departments." His transformation from enabler to advocate represented one of the more unexpected outcomes of the case, a reminder that systems comprised individuals capable of change, however belated. The legal consequences had extended far beyond individual officers. The civil lawsuit against Westfield Mall, Karen Livingston, and the Dunwoody Police Department had been settled for a combined $7 million, funds directed to the Wilson Foundation, which had already provided legal representation to 43 victims of similar discrimination. Karen Livingston had been ordered to complete 400 hours of community service and attend mandatory anti-bias training as part of her plea agreement for filing a false police report. The public exposure had cost her professionally and, personally, though recent reports suggested she was working with a therapist to understand the unconscious biases that had led to her actions. Bradley Reynolds remained unemployed in retail management, but had found work as a warehouse supervisor, his diminished career prospects a lasting consequence of his immediate assumption of Amara's guilt. The most significant institutional changes had come to the Dunwoody Police Department itself. Following the federal investigation triggered by Reynolds's testimony, the department had entered into a consent decree with the Justice Department, requiring comprehensive reforms in training, supervision, and accountability mechanisms. Captain Morrison had taken early retirement rather than oversee these changes, replaced by Atlanta's first black female police captain, whose appointment symbolized the department's commitment to cultural transformation. Elijah's promotion to the Pentagon had indeed materialized, creating difficult decisions about their professional futures. After extensive discussion, they had developed an unconventional arrangement. Amara maintained her position at Atlanta Memorial while spending 1 week per month in Washington, where she consulted on federal health policy alongside Elijah's work on institutional integrity and military intelligence. The compromise allowed them to maintain their marriage while pursuing their respective careers and civic responsibilities. The Wilson Foundation had grown beyond their initial vision, now employing a staff of 15 and partnering with law schools across the Southeast to provide pro bono representation in civil rights cases. What had begun as a response to personal injustice had evolved into an institutional force for accountability and reform. Among the Foundation's most significant achievements was the development of a comprehensive training program for retail security personnel, the same program now implemented at Westfield Mall and 27 other shopping centers nationwide. Amara's personal transformation had been equally profound. The trauma of public humiliation had initially manifested as anxiety in public spaces, particularly while shopping. Working with a therapist specializing in racial trauma, she had gradually reclaimed her comfort in these environments, today's visit to Luminous representing a significant milestone in that journey. Her professional identity had expanded beyond neurosurgery to include advocacy and education. Though she maintained a reduced surgical schedule, she now regularly spoke at medical conferences about racial disparities in healthcare and the experiences of black physicians. The platform she had never sought had become a mechanism for addressing systemic issues she had recognized throughout her career, but had previously navigated in silence. Perhaps the most unexpected development had occurred 3 months after the incident, when Amara received a consultation request for a pediatric patient with a rare arteriovenous malformation. The name on the file had immediately caught her attention: Emily Livingston, Karen's 12-year-old daughter. The ethical question had been immediate and complex. Could she provide unbiased care to the child of the woman whose false accusation had triggered her traumatic experience? After careful reflection and consultation with colleagues, Amara had chosen to accept the case. The surgery had been successful, the child's recovery uncomplicated. Karen's tearful gratitude afterward had created a moment of human connection that transcended the legal proceedings and public narratives surrounding their initial encounter. The choice to treat Emily represented Amara's commitment to her fundamental identity as a healer, regardless of personal history or justified resentment. 2 weeks after her visit to Luminous, Amara stood at a podium in the medical school auditorium addressing the graduating class of 2025. "Medicine calls us to see humanity in its most vulnerable moments," she told the diverse group of future physicians. "This perspective gives us unique insight into the systems that shape health outcomes, including systems of justice, economics, and social hierarchies." She paused, looking out at the attentive faces. "6 months ago, I was handcuffed in a boutique while shopping for my mother's birthday gift, not because of anything I did, but because of assumptions made about who I was based on my skin color. That experience could have left me bitter. Instead, it revealed the power of leveraging privilege and position to create accountability where it has been lacking." The graduates listened intently as she continued. "Some of you will face discrimination despite your white coats and credentials. Others will benefit from systems that automatically grant you presumption of competence and character. All of you will treat patients whose health has been shaped by these same systems. I challenge you to recognize these realities and use your position, whatever it may be, to create more equitable treatment for everyone you encounter." As her address concluded to standing applause, Amara felt a sense of closure, not because discrimination had been eliminated or justice fully realized, but because purpose had emerged from pain, transformation from trauma. The final revelation about the case had come just days earlier, when Elijah had been authorized to share previously classified information with her. The military-grade watch he had given her before her shopping trip hadn't been coincidental. For months, his unit had been gathering evidence of coordinated civil rights violations across multiple police departments, including Dunwoody. Her experience, while genuine and unprovoked, had been documented with particular thoroughness because of existing surveillance operations. The incident had accelerated a federal investigation already underway, providing irrefutable evidence that broke open a case spanning 3 counties and involving dozens of officers. The knowledge that her personal trauma had contributed to exposing a much broader pattern of abuse offered both vindication and perspective. Her individual experience connected to a larger struggle for accountability that preceded and would continue beyond her involvement. Later that evening, as Amara and Elijah prepared for a rare weekend together in Atlanta, a news alert appeared on their tablets. Michael Danvers, following his criminal conviction, was facing additional federal charges after investigators discovered his connections to a white supremacist organization that had systematically placed members in law enforcement positions throughout the Southeast. What had begun with a false accusation in a boutique had ultimately exposed a coordinated network of extremism operating within the legal system itself. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd worn your doctor's coat that day?" Elijah asked as they settled onto the patio, watching the sunset paint the Atlanta skyline in shades of orange and purple. Amara considered the question. "I'd have been treated with more respect, probably, but the underlying problem would have remained hidden, affecting countless others without my resources or platform." She thought of the dozens of cases the Wilson Foundation was currently handling, ordinary citizens whose similar experiences might never have received attention or justice without the infrastructure now in place. "We knew what we were doing," she added quietly. "Not the specific outcome, but the strategic approach, documenting everything, leveraging our positions, refusing private settlement, insisting on systemic rather than individual accountability." Elijah nodded, acknowledging the calculated decisions they had made at each stage, choices that had transformed a personal injustice into institutional change. The watch was just technology. The strategy was what mattered. As darkness fell over the city, Amara thought about how far they had come from that moment of humiliation in handcuffs, not just in time, but in impact. The transformation hadn't erased the trauma or eliminated the structures of discrimination that had enabled it, but it had created mechanisms for accountability, pathways for reform, and most importantly, hope for others navigating similar injustices without her advantages of position and connection. The next morning, Amara entered a high-end department store shopping for a gift for Elijah's upcoming birthday. As she browsed the men's accessories section, she noticed a police officer nearby, part of the regular security detail for the upscale mall. Their eyes met briefly, and the officer nodded respectfully before continuing his patrol. The simple acknowledgement, officer to citizen, professional to professional, represented neither special treatment nor unwarranted suspicion. Just the basic dignity that should be every person's right, regardless of skin color. It wasn't equality or justice in its fullest sense, but it was transformation in progress, the beginning of change that her ordeal had helped set in motion. What would you do if you witnessed racial profiling in a store or public place? Would you step forward as a witness, record the incident, or intervene directly? Your actions in these moments matter more than you might realize. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that addresses these critical issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of racial profiling and how systemic change begins with individual accountability. Thank you for listening to Dr. Amara Wilson's journey from humiliation to transformation, a reminder that justice requires both courage and strategy. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next video. Dr. Amara Wilson's journey illustrates powerful truths about racial discrimination in America. First, it demonstrates that education, wealth, and professional status offer no immunity from racial profiling. As a neurosurgeon, Amara still faced the same prejudice confronting countless Black Americans daily. Second, the story reveals how quickly false accusations can escalate into dangerous situations when underlying biases influence authority figures. What began as shopping became a life-altering confrontation within minutes. The story also highlights the critical importance of documentation. Without the irrefutable evidence captured by Amara's watch, justice might have remained elusive despite her resources and connections. For many without such advantages, their stories go unheard and unbelieved. Perhaps most significantly, the narrative shows that meaningful change requires strategic action beyond individual accountability. By refusing private settlement and demanding systemic reform, the Wilsons transformed personal trauma into institutional transformation. Finally, the story demonstrates the ripple effects of courageous action. One incident, properly leveraged, exposed patterns of discrimination extending far beyond a single department or encounter. It reminds us that justice is both deeply personal and inherently collective, requiring individuals willing to stand firm when wronged, but also demanding changes to the systems that enable such wrongs to persist. Real change happens when evidence meets strategy, when personal trauma becomes public accountability, and when individuals refuse to accept injustice as inevitable. What would you do if you witnessed racial discrimination happening right in front of you? Would you have the courage to speak up, record the incident, or support the person being targeted? Your actions in these moments matter more than you might realize. If Dr. Wilson's story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe too. Support more content that exposes these crucial social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of racial profiling and how systemic change begins with individual accountability. Have you or someone you know experienced similar treatment? Drop your story in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. Remember, silence often protects the powerful, while speaking truth creates the possibility for justice. Thank you for listening to this powerful journey from humiliation to transformation, a reminder that real change requires both courage and strategy. Stay with us for more stories that matter.